right now, and my thoughts that I would like to share on this day, on February 24th, the day of a full-scale invasion of Russian Federation into my home country, Ukraine. I didn't sleep last night. I was on the phone with my friends from Kiev, from Zaporizhia, and family. Very worried about what's going on, and I have some thoughts to share. My name is Anna, and I'm an internally displaced person from Crimea, Ukraine. I had to flee Crimea in 2014, and I fled from Russian occupation, and I ended up here in Canada. So my story starts with my daydreaming when I remember when I was a little girl, a rural girl in Crimea, growing up in Crimea, beautiful peninsula with mountains and sea. So daydreaming was one of my favorite pastimes. Whatever I heard or saw could make my thoughts fly far away. One day I was walking home from the village school and decided to walk through a small park instead of taking a usual sidewalk. At that moment, I began to wonder whether it was my choice which way to go, or it was already decided by God somewhere up there. I chose to go through the park, thinking that I changed my fate by making a decision. 20 years later, I was not so sure that my destiny was my own choice when my parents and I were fleeing on the last train from my home into uncertainty. In early spring of 2014, foreign troops invaded Ukraine and occupied my beautiful Crimea. A month later, a war broke out in the east of Ukraine. Surprisingly, in that moment, I was not upset about leaving, but rather anxious and scared to be detained by Russian paramilitary and tortured like the coordinator of our protest movement in Crimea, or even worse, found dead in a ditch like Rishat Ametov, a father of three who went on a one-man protest a week before. After what Russia did in Transnistria, Chechnya, and Georgia, I knew that anything can be expected from Mr. Putin. Russia invaded Crimea when Ukrainian people were mourning loss of over 100 of civilian protesters in Kiev, who were killed by the pro-Russian dictator Viktor Yanukovych. Blue and yellow Ukrainian flags were my symbol of awakening of national identity and democratic aspirations. Russia's paramilitary in Crimea started to persecute people wearing those colors. So I took off my blue and yellow ribbon bracelet and hid it along with my Ukrainian flag and the rest of my life that could fit into 2 suitcases. After a few hours of traveling in silence, we saw Ukrainian flag at the border with the mainland Ukraine. The whirlpool of adrenaline in my stomach turned into tears of relief that now we were safe. This feeling was mixed with the feeling of guilt that I was such a coward. I could not imagine that eight years later, occupation of Crimea will be the start of Russia's war in the east of Ukraine and a full-scale invasion that started a few hours ago. Mr. Putin declared occupied territories in the east of Ukraine as part of Russia, brought in troops claiming them as peacekeepers. Ukraine is now surrounded with almost 200,000 troops, and a few hours ago, Putin started shelling strategic infrastructure in major cities of Ukraine. And also, Russian tanks and military vehicles crossed the borders from Belarus, from Crimea, and other parts. My friend with one-year-old baby put a bag together and researched the closest bomb shelter. She lives in Kiev, and she's worried and shocked. She's trying to keep calm and stay at home, but cannot stop reading news and being worried about what's going to happen, especially with a baby in her hands. History repeats itself. It is this scenario that Hitler did by occupying Sudetenland in 1938 and taking over the entire Czechoslovakia a year later. This is how World War II started, with an insane leader who made the entire country believe that they are better than anyone else and repressed the rest who were against him. This is what Mr. Putin is doing in his country. In his country, rural families have no toilets inside the house and heat their homes with coal and wood, while the gas king Putin sells gas abroad and making big money for himself. Poverty and alcoholism are all around, but to distract from internal problems, Mr. Putin makes it his people believe that NATO and everyone wants to destroy Russia. If NATO wanted to destroy Russia, it would do it at Russia's weakest point right after USSR collapse in the 90s. Mr. Putin wants to revive USSR and rule there. To justify his aggressive acts, he claims that Ukraine is not a real state, that this was invented by Lenin and Bolsheviks. But the truth is, Kiev Rus existed for 300 years and was prosperous before Moscow was even established. The truth is, Ukraine has 1,000-year-old history, rich culture, language, identity, which were constantly suppressed by Soviet colonization. Ukraine declared its independence in 1918, and then United Ukraine, West and East and Center declared its independence in the 1919 again. But Bolsheviks used military force and crashed this movement. Russia uses blatant lies and propaganda to justify its international terrorism. I saw that during occupation of Crimea, when staged demonstrations were set up to show it on the camera, and then half an hour later, there was nobody around when cameras were away. And I see it happening now. All Russia's media and paid army of trolls is under Putin's control. They meddle in other countries and polarize societies in other countries to destabilize them. So be aware about this. Read news in trusted sources to really understand what is really going on. Ukraine is an independent state which is under military attack. This is unprecedented since World War II. This is an attack on democracy as a system, on international laws and peace. This is not just a local crisis. Ukraine is on guard of free Europe, democracy, and international peace right now. We have to stop this now by the toughest sanctions ever possible, by shutting down Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, by bringing Putin to the Hague International Criminal Court for downing the Malaysian airplane and waging a war in Ukraine that took 14,000 lives already, and for torturing political prisoners in Russia and also in occupied Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, and prisoners of war, and over 100 political prisoners from Crimea who are now in Russian jails. I also want to appeal to people of Russia. Why do you allow Putin and a small group of people around him to do this to you? Why do you have to send your sons to a war to kill innocent people to please your president's ego? Why he does not invest in his people's prosperity, in climate change, instead he investing in the military. Putin made it that the whole world started hating Russians, especially Ukrainians. Ukrainians want peace. Ukrainians want to live in their own country, to have their own government, to make their own decisions, which alliances they should join or not. And if there is a threat, Ukrainians are looking for a way to protect themselves from this threat. Right now, this threat comes from Russia. I hope that one day I will start painting just for fun and not only for self-care in between demonstrations and fundraising to support Ukraine and support internally displaced people or wounded veterans or children who lost their fathers in this war or children who lost their homes in this war. I hope that I will create, my own cozy home, and it will be the safest place in the world, and that I will return to free Crimea one day to take back all my family albums that I did not fit into my 2 suitcases when I was fleeing. So please stop this war now. Stop Putin now, before we have a stupid World War III. That's everything I have to say. Thank you.